Welcome to The Lead, the New Lines Magazine podcast. I'm Surbhi Gupta, and this is a podcast where we delve into the biggest ideas, events, and personalities from around the world. In India, young people seldom have the agency to choose their own partners. Marriages are usually arranged by families with multiple factors kept in mind: class, caste, clan, religion, profession, and physical appearances. Hence, there exists a dichotomy with what is known in India as a love marriage, where people dare to choose a partner on their own. While finding love has become acceptable and normal in the last few years because of pop culture and dating apps, there is still a taboo. Families just don't accept it. Just last week, a couple died by jumping in front of a moving train in Rajasthan because they had a love affair, the police said. Less than 10% choose their own partners in India. And this love becomes even more political when people decide to cross the boundaries of caste and religion. It is often accompanied by social ostracization and extreme violence in the form of honor killing, where couples are murdered by their own families. In the last few years, Hindu Muslim couples have increasingly been targeted by Hindu right wing vigilantes who accuse Muslim men of love jihad, a conspiracy theory according to which they feign love to get Hindu women to convert to Islam. Several state governments have been introducing laws to criminalize such unions. Meanwhile, homosexuality was decriminalized in 2018, but social attitudes have not yet completely caught up. Same sex marriage is not yet legal in India and is currently being debated in the Supreme Court. Indian journalist and writer Mansi Choksi writes about this political love in her debut book, The Newlyweds, where she tracks the trajectories of three couples in India: an intercaste, a Hindu Muslim, and a lesbian couple over the last 5 years. She has also investigated the works of Love Commandos, a volunteer group that was once hailed for providing shelter to such couples, but eventually had its co founder arrested for abuse and extortion. This investigation became the focus of the latest season of NPR's Rough Translations podcast, which she guest hosts along with creator Gregory Warner. Mansi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I would like to start with, in India we have two kind of marriages, arranged and love. And I think love marriages have only been normalized in the last 2 decades, one could say.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I don't even know if they're really normalized yet. It's just, I think it's one of those fault lines that exposes a lot of the underlying forces that are shaping India. It's one of those fault lines like religion and, you know, politics. Love marriage is, a political act in India even now.
why do you say that?
So the traditional way of marriage in India is arranged marriage, which means that it is a match arranged by a bride and a groom's family. Things such as caste, class, clan, language, region, community are taken into account when arranging such a marriage. And I think sociologically, this is a cherished observance because this is a tool that is used to strengthen power hierarchies. India is a society where we derive our sense of identity from the groups that we belong to. We have a big emphasis on collective identities as opposed to like individual identities. And everything about our daily lives and our politics are arranged around these groups and hierarchies. So arranged marriage is one of those tools to cement those hierarchies. So if you marry, if an upper caste person marries another upper caste person, that consolidates power. And if an upper caste person marries a lower caste person, it threatens that same power hierarchy. So that is the traditional way of marriage, and the other is love marriage, which is, I think, what people think of as marriage anywhere else in the world. Just marriage anywhere else is called love marriage in India, which means that a young person chooses their own partner. Often when a young person chooses their own partner, they don't think about things like caste, community, language. Often we do because we're also raised in like deep in these like sociological like environments where we learn a lot of things by just observing people around us. But yeah, I mean, where those love marriage is one place in India where those power hierarchies do get threatened. So yeah, so love marriage in India is marriage anywhere else in the world.
Right, but how much agency do you think people have in either of the scenarios? Like, do young people have agency in arranged marriages? How much?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they do. There is an idea that we have a very like unnuanced ideas often of what an arranged marriage can look like. Now, there's many tools available for people to like decide for themselves who they would like to marry. So it's almost as if arranged marriage is another kind of like dating platform in India, where instead of an app, it's your parents introducing you to someone that could be potentially your life partner. So I think there is some amount of agency, but of course, like love marriage is something that has the true meaning of agency in it, which is that you're choosing a partner of your liking, as opposed to
Right,
choosing a partner of your liking within the confines of what your parents think is appropriate. That's the difference.
right. But I don't know, you must have seen this news earlier this month. The chief minister of Gujarat said that, they're kind of examining if a system could be implemented where it mandates parental approval for love marriages. And he
Yeah.
used a phrase that was very striking at a time when parents are neglected in love marriages. So if you could
Yeah.
talk more about what is the importance of parents and family.
Yeah, I mean, often there's a saying that goes back like several generations in India. When we think about marriage, it's not a arrangement between a couple, but it's an arrangement between two families. It's a trope that is constantly repeated in Hindi movies. In families across the country, the idea that you're not only choosing a partner, but you're like choosing to like join a family with your birth family. And I think this kind of goes back, and also the chief minister's comments, I think all stem from this like idea of filial duty that we as Indians feel towards our parents. Like, we have, I think, one of the greatest boundaries apart from caste, class, religion, etc. In India, the greatest boundary is disappointing your parents. We really derive our ideas of right and wrong, and of a lot of like our lives are so interdependent on our parents' lives. And of course, this goes back to the family structure, the fact that rarely do young people kind of like after marriage separate and like live by themselves. There's just no culture of like living by yourself in India. It's frowned upon in many parts of the country. So yeah, our lives are so intertwined with the will and sort of opinions of our parents, that's probably where this comes from.
Right. And I think what really stood out to me, even in your book, was the survey you mentioned that there's only one third of young Indians who believe in intercaste marriages.
Right.
Half of them are opposed to interreligious marriages. They don't
Yeah.
approve of dating before marriage.
Right. Right.
And most of them, like you said, would want to take the permission of their families. And then only 6% of us choose our own partners. So are young Indians not as progressive as we'd like to believe? Do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think the this particular generation of young people is unique in like many different ways. One is that we're the first generation of young people that grew up when the economy was liberalizing. We grew up when internet, social media, computers, became a daily household. And for the first time, we were the first generation of young people that were able to see how young people outside of India live, and how a young like pop culture came to us. When the economy liberalized, it was a really mind-blowing experience growing up in India. You went from like having only Doordarshan to watch to having like MTV and like all these other forms of pop culture kind of come straight into your home and make you different in a way. We didn't have the like our parents were born with the burden of partition and all of that. We're a very unique generation, and I think that this generation, because of the time at which we were born, um, I think there is this big push and pull factor of tradition and modernity that is, gnawing at us. And love marriage is one of those fault lines. And I don't know if we're progressive or not. It's just I don't know if I think the answer to your question is that we're still figuring out what it means to be modern. we're still figuring out how much of modernity is equal to tradition minus rebellion, or tradition plus rebellion equals to modernity. We don't know yet. We're just like inventing our own. For the longest time, like for our parents' generation, modernity meant anything that was anti-Indian. So it was, Western was considered modern. Now we're like have a more nuanced approach to it, where also, we're not trying to look at our ideas of modernity in the binary of Western and non-Western. So yeah, I think there are these conversations happening across the country, and I think that young people in India are just trying to figure themselves out, like anywhere else in the world, I guess.
Speaking about the different fault lines like caste, religion, also sexuality and
Right. Yeah.
preferences. So I want to know, what does digressing from them mean in India?
The stakes are really varied, right? Like the stakes can be the stakes can be as little as disappointing your parents to honor killing. Like there's, it can take various shapes and forms. Things like but the thing in my reporting, the thing that I have found is that it is because we have such a internalized sense of what morality means, that when young people choose their own partners, there is a lot of them struggle with like emotions of guilt and regret. And that's also one of the fallouts of making a choice like that. Indian children, we're pretty duty bound in, in many ways. Like we're quite duteous, and have this idea of like, filial piety, and like, often young people that have chosen their own partners, like the kinds that like pass through the love commando shelter, for instance, these are the kinds of young people that have probably never made a single decision for themselves in their life until taking the decision of running away. They're young people who've been told what to wear, what to study, who to spend time with, what to eat. And then suddenly they are making this one massive decision of choosing a life partner, risking everything they hold dear and running away, and, like landing up in a random shelter in New Delhi. It's just such a shift from their normal personalities. It's not as if the couples that come to the Love Commando shelter are like rebels, or like, are, have been are like difficult children, or have had any like of, disobeying their parents. So I think a big part of your answer is that one of the biggest and most common stakes is, and like the fallout, the result, consequences of choosing your own partner is guilt and regret. And and that kind of like overshadows a lot of their like daily life after they've run away and settled down somewhere. So when we watch Bollywood movies, they end at like a high note, right, where like a couple has crossed a massive barrier, they have come together, and then it ends at a high. But obviously in real life, these people are dealing with, like what it means for this big grand love that they watched on the screen to really be reassigned into the smallness of daily life. Like they, to live with that, the consequences of that decision, knowing that you'll never speak to your parents again, you'll never see your family again, you'll never, speak to friends and cousins who you grew up with. It's just such a massive shift and change that it really takes a lot of, it's a long process of like grieving and loss. It's not always honor killings, but I think most often it is this long process of grief that comes after making this choice.
Right. And one of my favorite lines in your book is that often when love is gained, it can start to feel unheroic. The
Yeah.
process of reconciliation with our choices can both be beautiful and terrible. And I think what I loved about the book was they did not just talk about what these couples went through.
Yeah, it really dwells a lot on, what they did, like the rising action, but then also the just the dullness of everyday life
And
to.
dealing with the repercussions, or just like the result or the reality of the choices they make, at
Exactly,
that.
absolutely, absolutely, you're so right.
That what I liked about it was that you did not just tell us what these couples go through to get married, but also what married life is about. That, if they were regretting their choices, questioning their choices. So if you could tell me more about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I think one third of this book dwells in this part of the story where they're meant to kind of reacquaint themselves with their new lives, meant to kind of like reckon with the choices that they've made. So in the book, for instance, there's Neetu and Davinder, and that is the intercaste couple in Haryana that run away, land up at the Love Commando shelter, and then she finds herself kind of like having fallen into the grip of her aunt-in-law, who kind of takes it upon herself to train her to be a duteous daughter-in-law. So it's just like they've come from like one system, they've like rebelled against one idea, and then they seek acceptance to come back into those same family structures. And then there's chapter 2 of their lives, which kind of is tainted with like guilt and regret. With Arif and Monica, the Hindu and Muslim couple that get hunted by the Hindu right wing. They kind of move to another city. He's working as a cop, and she's spending her days at home. And in this story, there's just a deep sort of sadness that like follows Monica everywhere she goes. She has they're back to being in touch with Arif's family, but Monica has not spoken to anyone in her family, so she feels that huge sense of loss and grief for not being in touch with her family. And it's just honestly heartbreaking to see that, because he has moved on. He's trying to like make a living. He's trying to like make a living for them. And she has all these like empty hours in her day that kind of just like fill with these haunting silences. And then there's a third couple, Reshma and Preeti. They actually, if you haven't read the book, this is a spoiler. They actually, split at the end. And Preeti chooses to enter a heteronormative marriage. And, she's in her life happy, thinking about having a child. And Reshma is, out on her own, still looking for love. Yeah, so it's just, this was reporting that like took place over a long period of time. And I think that over the course of that time, it was a really humbling and sobering experience to see how they had grown. They had grown up. They had grown weary. They had grown cynical. They had grown jaded. And by the end of it, when I met them, they were these happy, naive people. And then by the time that by the time they leave in the book, there's some other grown up versions of themselves. So that was a really incredible opportunity to be able to to be able to be let into their lives and to be given this kind of close, intimate access. It was really, I think, a life changing experience for me.
And how did you conceive the book?
Actually, the book began as a magazine story. It began as a magazine story for Harper's. The whole thing began when I watched Satyamev Jayate, the Indian reality talk show in 2012, and I watched Sanjay Sachdev on it, and I was like, this is crazy that this exists. Like, this sounds so cool. I need to go and hang out with the Love Commandos and find out, what they're about. And by then, they were actually written about everywhere, world over. They were written about in every major newspaper and press. I was trying to find a way to like enter the story in like a unique way. And then like many years went by. I was living in New York at the time, and I got a grant to go to Sri Lanka for another article. And I said that, well, I'm like in the neighborhood, so I can like just go to Delhi, see what they're about, and try to pitch the story. So I did that. I spent a week with them, and then I pitched it to Harper's. And that, honestly, that's how it began. And then I returned to do more reporting. And yeah, from that grew the book. And then from the book grew the podcast. So it's been a long
Yeah.
journey.
So Love Command is also very interesting that, like initially hailed for protecting and celebrating
Yeah,
that
yeah,
rebellious love,
right.
but Sanjay Sachdeva, who's the co-founder, is now in prison for extortion. So
Yeah, no,
if you
he's
could tell
actually
us,
out.
he's
He's
out?
out and it's up and running again.
Okay, but if you could tell us more about the work that Love Commandos and he has done,
Yeah.
and more about what you found out in your reporting.
Yeah, yeah. So the Love Commandos, they call themselves. Do they call themselves? They're a vigilante group that basically Sanjay Sachdev is like a man in his mid 50s. When you look at him, he looks like disheveled. He wears a Nehruvian handspun kurta and jacket most times. He's chain smoking, and he just seems like, yeah, this is an image that is this is an image that conjures Sachdev. He started his career as a railway spokesperson, and then he was a Hindi journalist. In the 2000s, when Valentine's Day would come, the Shiv Sainiks, the Hindu right wing vigilantes in Delhi, would go from parks and would go to parks and colleges and start harassing couples that were spending time together because they wanted to protest the Western corruption of Indian values. And Sachdev, at that time, who was reporting the story, realized that this is a grave injustice and that something should be done to protect the rights of young lovers in India. So he created this organization called the Indian Peace Commandos, and he would just, kind of become active around Valentine's Day and just like fight back any right wing worker that was harassing couples. And then one day he was sitting at the Delhi Press Club with his friends, and someone said, "Okay, you guys do such great work. Why don't you like make this a mission?" And by then, Sachdev had tried his hand at a couple of different businesses. He started a flavored milk factory, a car parts factory, and nothing was clicking. So then he, hits up an old friend, and they start the Love Commandos, and they give us this catchy name. And it begins, the midday, or some newspaper writes about it the next day, and it's on, whatever, it's modest. And then he appears on Satyamev Jayate, which is, I think, a good equivalent to explain it to, non-Indian listeners would be that it's, India's version of Oprah. It's a big, massive platform. So he is featured then in an episode about intolerance towards love. And he comes in, he's a very charming personality. He is someone who can, he's quoting Hindu poetry on one hand, and like sort of like fine, just quoting a Supreme Court judgment on another. He's just like really erudite and intellectual and a really good spokesperson and very charming too. So you see that, and he has a massive TV presence, and you can see the audience kind of like burst into applause. So that's where his rise really began. So when after he appeared on Satyamev Jayate, his phone just would not stop ringing off the hook, and he would have couples coming in and out. He got a lot of like media attention after that. I think every major newspaper, I think BBC did a documentary on him. There's a documentary about him on Amazon Prime. It's just, he was everywhere. And at the time, what happened is, he was basically everywhere. And yeah, he just started getting a lot of interest. And at that point, he also started getting interest from Western donors. So there was a Swedish clothing company that was, that made a big donation. Shadi.com gave him a bunch of money as part of their CSR initiatives. And yeah, he was blowing up, and he was making a lot of money. And by the time I got to him in 2016, he had been written about pretty much everywhere, and they were all glowing stories. As I started spending more time with them, I started to feel that, something wasn't right, and I kept returning. And, Sachdev is the kind of man that is really savvy about access, because he's a journalist himself. So he knows what would interest or pique interest. And then, he kind of stonewalls you. And I think that the fact that if I hadn't kept on returning, I probably would not have had a sense of where things were going. So yeah, I kept returning, and slowly it started to emerge that he was not all that he, was made out to be. When I left, the couple that I met there got in touch with me, and then I got the full picture, and then I returned to India and I wrote the Harper's piece. And then after that, Lauren Freya, the NPR's international correspondent in India, she was also reporting on that. I think she began in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. No, 2016 was me. She began in 2018. And then yeah, so she started speaking to a bunch of people that had passed through the shelter as well. And then when we came down to the podcast, it was for the first time that we were able to compare my reporting with Lauren's reporting, and together we had so many interviews. I think between us we had spoken to about 50 people. I'm not sure about the exact number, but we'd spoken to a lot of people, and a pattern had started to emerge. But yeah, you'll have to hear the last episode to find out what really happens of the rough translation series. I don't want to give that away. Yeah.
But till now, whatever we know, it is so revealing that the lack of privacy, the lack of agency that they
Yeah.
have, even at the shelter, the harassment that they face,
Right.
they don't have their documents, they can't make their own decisions.
Yeah, they escape like one oppressive system to just be stuck in another.
Going back to honor killings you mentioned, that we know that they're common in India,
Yeah.
but that number is not really reflected in the official data or our
Right.
mainstream media.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they're also recorded as murders, injuries, kidnappings, so we don't know the extent of it.
Right. Right.
So we do get a sense of how this violence takes place both in your book and the podcast. So could you tell us
Right.
more about it, like more
Yeah.
about the nature of this violence?
So yeah, honor killings is basically when the family of the girl or the boy murders the child for marrying outside of whichever boundary of tradition they're crossing, community, class, village, clan, etc. And the thing with honor killing law in India is that there is no, so far there is no specific piece of legislation to deal with honor killings. There is that, there are a bunch of bills that are being debated in parliament, but there isn't, it isn't treated separately from murder. Often honor killings also just go underreported because they kind of shushed within the family, and the culprits are family members.
But what about the role of the police? Like, how much do they intervene, or is it usually, supposed to be a family matter and not,
Yeah.
to be dealt
Actually, there
with?
are now
So,
provisions in place to make sure. Often, what happens is that when an honor crime is reported, the police side with the family. So, like, if for instance, if a couple is in danger and they bring themselves to the police station saying, "Hi, I'm in danger. My family might try to kill me because I've chosen to marry this person, even though I'm, legally an adult and this is my constitutional right to do so." The cop will likely say, "What you're doing is wrong. You should go back to your family and, like, not do this." But their job is to actually uphold what the Constitution and the Indian Penal Code is telling them to do, and not what these invisible ideas of tradition is expecting them to do. But of course, like, cops are human beings and they're part of society, so they do often side with the grieving family because they themselves feel that that is the right thing to do. Yeah. But so one of the honor killings bills actually made a note of this, and made a special clause to say that there should be accountability. So if a couple finds themselves in danger and reports themselves to a police station, the police must act in favor of that couple. There was a clause because this is such a common practice that some kind of clause had to be put in. And there's all kinds of violence. There's violence like kidnapping, torture, physical assault. Also, things like social ostracization and boycott. Like, for instance, a person that might harbor a love couple might be ostracized by the community. In the Manoj and Bubbly case, which was one of the honor killings that inspired a lot of, like, legal action and a bunch of political discourse around the issue of honor killings. What had happened was that Manoj and Bubbly were, two young lovers from a village in Haryana belonging to the same clan or to the same gotra. And when they ran away, they actually reported themselves to the police, got a protection order from the court saying that basically gave them a police escort that would follow them everywhere and make sure they're safe. And what had happened is that the police escort went up to the end of the jurisdiction of his state, and then they were left on their own. And then they were kidnapped by the girl's family, and they were brutally murdered. Their bodies were found dumped in, gunny sacks in a village canal. And it was a horrifying, horrifying, really chilling case that, spurred a lot of public action on this issue. And it was the first time that a Khap Panchayat leader was convicted, but I think he was later acquitted in the case. But also the role of Khap Panchayats, which are like kangaroo or village councils in the North Indian belt. They're essentially groups of unelected upper caste men that issue diktats about social life and, rules about upholding the caste system in, large swaths of rural India. Their role was investigated in this honor killing. So yeah, there is, and also honor killings is not just a rural phenomenon. You'll also hear about it in, big cities. Sadly, that is the truth. Yeah.
right. And though we've been hearing about honor killings for a while, but I think now what also we've been hearing more and more about is, and I think the most forbidden and punished union in India would be between the Hindu and the Muslim.
Right. Yeah.
And we often see like how right wing Hindu vigilantes
Right.
groups are always on the lookout, and especially if it's a Hindu woman and an
Right.
Muslim man.
Yeah.
And love jihad is now what we also hear a lot about, a
Yeah.
conspiracy theory which accuses Muslim men of feigning love to force women to convert to Islam.
Right.
And we've been seeing like and more governments are now introducing laws
Right.
basically criminalizing conversion and
Yeah.
such unions. So if you could tell us more about the politics of love jihad and
Yeah.
what you're reporting from on the ground has kind of
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
told you
So
about.
yeah, so love jihad as an idea was came about in the 1920s. In the 1920s in Meerut, there was a periodical that basically issued these images of how Muslims were basically defiling two symbols that were sacred in Hinduism. One was the cow and the other was the woman. And even in a book that was it Hegrevar or Savarkar, I'm not really sure, but in one of the books written by a prominent Hindu right wing thought leader, this idea that Muslims are taking away Hindu women as as part of a concerted thought out effort to convert them to Islam and eventually outnumber the Hindu population, was introduced back then. This is something that has like regained currency post 2014 when Prime Minister Modi came to power, and just this general wave of muscular Hindu nationalism started to sweep across the country after the when in the year after Modi came to power in 2014. We saw an uptick in not an uptick actually the invention of beef lynchings, where Muslim men were lynched to death in sort of like medieval bloodletting across the country on suspicion of eating beef. um, and then alongside that was this idea of love jihad, where at one point I think on Twitter some Hindu vigilante released a list of names of Muslim men and Hindu women in marriages, and instructed workers to like go find them and hunt them down. There were these like I for instance I met a worker at one of the right wing groups that gave me a pamphlet about the signs that Hindu women were being tricked by Muslim men. For instance, that they were imploring Hindu communities to like not allow Hindu women to to go to college unattended, don't give them mobile phones, don't let them wear jeans, don't let them don't let them go unchaperoned, because Muslim men are you know trying to lure them at these like schools and college campuses. Yeah, just this paranoia, this absolute utter paranoia around the idea that Hindu women are being taken away by Muslim men is an invention that has harmed so many real ordinary lives. Like, for instance, I spent a long time during the reporting of my book spending time with Arif and Monica, who were exactly one of those couples that find themselves entangled in a love jihad controversy. They fall in love like any normal young couple does, and you know Monica's sister, who also harbors feelings for Arif, gets the idea that one way to get back at them is to tip off the local Bajrang Dal and let them know that this is a case of love jihad. And then overnight, things escalate, and they find themselves, fleeing from town to town, not knowing what to do with themselves, and just being hunted essentially by an entire, group of invisible enemies who they don't even know. They it's just it takes them years and years to untether themselves from that love jihad fallout, and even now it's just such a sore issue that cuts deep for them.
Right. Do you think it's like now people will be more like mindful, or people are more mindful of these fault lines? Has
I
it
should hope
ever?
so. I really hope so, but I don't think so. Like I mean, that could just we can hope for it, but I really don't think so. The way that things are going in India, like the news that's coming out of Gurgaon, just every day we're hearing about some like hate crime against a Muslim who's just minding his own business. It's just a really vicious, religiously charged environment in the country right now, and this is exactly what I think a lot of us were worrying about in 2014 when Modi was coming to power, and now we're like seeing the fruits of it. It's a really terrifying and honestly like tragic state of affairs.
Right. But moving on to that from another kind of marriage, I would say, basically moving on to same sex
Yeah.
marriages, which is
Yeah.
also a hot topic right now because they're not yet legal in India.
Yeah.
But 18 couples approached the Supreme Court petitioning to legalize it. Homosexuality was decriminalized in 2018. We've been seeing more representation of queer and gay communities in pop culture, on social media, but social attitudes haven't really changed. Even see the arguments from the government. They say that these Western decisions, this Western culture cannot be imposed and imported to India, and marriage depends on those age-old customs and
Right.
rituals and practices. So, do you think like same-sex marriages will be accepted in India? Like, what is your reading from whatever your research reporting?
Yeah.
Um,
For as long as time, same sex marriages have existed in India, even if they're not legally recognized. Couples that, exchange garlands in a temple and make a promise or a vow to each other, circle a holy fire in a bedroom or in a living room with their loved ones. Just because marriage as an idea is so deeply ingrained in us, where, we seek that. There's, I guess, a sanctity that comes with this institution that we crave in most relationships. So marriage in among same-sex couples has, been around forever. I think what is, I mean, the thing is that when the Supreme Court decriminalized homosexuality, that was one big win. But marriage equality is something that is like, yeah, it should have been done ages ago. And it is a basic fundamental human right and a fundamental right for any citizen of India. And I just don't see why it's taking so long. I know that, like, from my reporting, like, had Reshma and Preeti been able to marry legally, it would have been a completely different story for them. I think this, their relationship and their marriage, their relationship started coming apart because it started fraying because of the fact that it was not acknowledged in the eyes of others. And had it been legally acknowledged, the others would have had to, like the families would have had to sit up and take notice. I think, especially for a society like India, marriage equality for same-sex couples would is just, yeah, so critical and so key.
right, but what do you think are the social attitudes on the ground among people? Like, do you think even homosexuality, like, what are the like, what is the, like, how do people view it? How do people perceive it?
I think there
From
is
what
a
I've
lot of there is a fair amount of social stigma still. Of course, there's a lot more acceptance than there was, say, in the 90s. But it's not an easy road to be an LGBT person in India. You're constantly fighting. We have these, like, ideas of what masculinity should look like, what a marriage, what a respectable relationship should look like. All these ideas really wear you down as a LGBT person. But you're fighting a battle at every stage. And yeah, of course, there is more acceptance today than there was, like, 20 years ago, but it's not nearly there.
right.
Yeah.
Um, okay. I was watching the latest season of Made in Heaven.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I haven't had a chance to watch it at all. It's about a matchmaker, Tara, right?
It's about two wedding planners
Ha,
organizing weddings
ha, yeah, yeah, yeah.
within the circle. And I think one of the reasons the show was so critically acclaimed was how we could learn about all these fault lines we've spoken about,
Mm.
be it class, caste, religion, sexuality. Also, with issues of dowry, intimate partner violence, colorism. I think a good concluding question would be, how central are marriages to the Indian society?
I mean, I have a line in my book where I say marriage is the only intended outcome of growing up in India. Like, that's how it feels for a lot of us. Like, you grow up only to get married. Like, what else are you growing up for? I mean, this is your role in, strengthening the power hierarchies we talked about right in the beginning of this episode, where you're a tool in bringing communities closer, consolidating power, and keeping systems that allow us to live in equilibrium in place. That's I mean, marriage is a tool for this sociological purpose. And on a family level, it's almost as if it's seen as a marker of success. Like finding the right match for your son or daughter is like your ultimate duty towards your child. And and not disobeying your parents' choice for marriage is possibly the ultimate disrespect that you can have towards your parents.
Mansi Choksi, thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
This has been The Lead, the New Lines Magazine podcast. You can find Mansi on Twitter at Mansi_Choksi and buy her book, The Newlyweds, in all good bookshops. You can also listen to her on NPR's Rough Translations wherever you listen to podcasts. This week's episode was produced by Joshua Martin and hosted by me, Surbhi Gupta. For more like this, subscribe to The Lead on your favorite podcast app or visit our website, newlinesmag.com. Thank you all for joining.